It's that time of year when we should all soon be expecting the announcement of the newest iPhone models for 2019. And I say models because based off of Apple's current trend, it's probably safe to say that we will be expecting 3 new devices just like last year with the iPhone XS, XS Max, and XR. And of course, each model came with different screen sizes, different prices, and were all tailored to different users. Now, I've personally had a lot of experience with all 3 devices, but I decided to go with the iPhone XR mainly because of cost, screen size, and battery life because, well, this phone is said to have the best battery life of any iPhone ever. So I purchased the XR the exact same day that it came out, and random fact, this is actually the first iPhone device I've ever owned. I've always been an Android user, which I still am, but I decided to make the switch to iPhone, and the XR seemed like a great device to do it with. So with that being said, I've been using this phone for almost a year now and have had plenty of time to really put it to the test. And while there's a lot that I love about this phone, there are also some stuff that I definitely did not like about this phone. So one of my favorite things about the iPhone XR is the design. This phone has a really sleek and simple, yet great design that I really enjoyed over my time of using it. It's a full glass and aluminum build, so it does have a very premium feel in the hand. In fact, this is one of those phones that I just loved using without a case and screen protector. Now, compared to something like the XS and XS Max, those do come with a stainless steel build, which is more of a premium material, but the aluminum here on the XR is still great. Now, something that the XR has that the other models don't is that it comes with 6 different color options. And I think that all the colors here look great, but I decided to go with black because, well, honestly, it was the only color available at the time that I purchased the phone. But really, I feel like there's a color here for everyone. If I didn't get stuck with black, I probably would have gone with red or coral, maybe even white. You know, now that I think about it, black was probably an easier choice. Now, another key difference between the XR, XS, and XS Max is that it is only rated IPS 67 water and dust resistant compared to the other models being IPS 68 dust and water resistant, which means while those phones can withstand water up to 2 meters for 30 minutes, the XR can only do 1 meter for 30 minutes. So really not a huge deal, not too much of a difference, and you really shouldn't be dumping your phone in water anyways. Aside from that, the biggest difference here with the XR is the display, and coincidentally enough, it's also the most controversial. So while the XS and XS Max have an OLED display with the capability of 4K video playback, the XR has an LCD display with up to 1080p video playback. Yeah, so really not that great, and this shows why the phone costs much less than the other models. So to get into the actual specs of the display, the XR has a 6.1-inch liquid retina display, which again is just a fancy word for LCD, and the resolution of this display is 828 by 1792 with a pixels per inch density of 326. Yeah, this display is just not it. I mean, don't get me wrong, this is still a good display, and to the average user, it won't even be that noticeable. But if you're like me, and you've been spoiled by using other smartphones with a display of much higher resolutions, then you'll definitely notice the lack of quality here. This is definitely not the ideal choice for someone who loves to watch videos and movies. In fact, I hardly did on this phone because it just wasn't enjoyable. And again, because it is an LCD display, that does also mean that you won't get true blacks with this phone like you would with an OLED display. Also, and this is my final complaint about the display, the XR has much thicker bezels compared to the XS and XS Max. Again, I've been using this phone for almost a year now, and while the bezels are not as noticeable as they were when I first got the phone, they're still definitely there. I still notice them every time I use the phone, but I'm more used to them now than I was back then, so they don't bother me as much. Again, if you're someone who really doesn't care too much about display technology, then by all means this will be a great display for you. When it comes to web browsing and using apps like Instagram, Snapchat, or Twitter, then this display is completely fine and does the job. But if you're really picky about your screen pixels like I am, and you want the best video and movie watching experience, then this display is probably not going to be for you, and I really recommend going up to either the XS or XS Max if possible. But really guys, that is my only real complaint about this phone. Everything else about the iPhone XR I liked. The stereo speakers did a great job. While they weren't as loud as I'd like, the sound quality was still great. Face ID worked great a majority of the time, and the overall user experience was great thanks to the great hardware that this phone is running on. And the great thing about the iPhone XR is that, like the XS and XS Max, It too is running on the latest A12 Bionic chipset. However, this one is paired with 3GB of RAM compared to 4GB found on the other models, which really, because the display is pushing less pixels, there's hardly a difference in processing speed, making this a very quick and snappy phone. In the months that I've owned this phone, I've probably only experienced apps crash maybe 3 times at most. So that's a really good ratio there, and this has easily become one of my favorite devices for everyday use. Also, and I should mention this now, the XR does come in 64, 128, and 256GB options, of course, without the option for expandable memory. Another thing I really liked about the XR is the battery life, and you've probably heard by now, and I mentioned this earlier on in the review, but the iPhone XR is said to have the best battery life of any Apple phone ever, and I can agree with that. The battery life on here was great. It's a 2,942 milliamp hour battery, and I easily got through the day with moderate to heavy usage on this phone. Again, mainly thanks to the A12 chip and the lower pixel resolution of the screen. Now, certain apps like FaceTime did drain the battery life much faster, which makes sense, but overall I love the battery life here, and when you pair the iPhone XR with a fast charger, you can easily get hours of usage in a matter of minutes. I believe it's rated at 50% in 30 minutes with the 15-watt charger. But of course, you also have the option to wirelessly charge this phone if you prefer to do that. Aside from the display technology, another big difference between the XR and the XS and XS Max is the camera. While the other two devices are rocking that dual camera setup with the standard lens and the telephoto lens, the XR only has one lens, which is the standard lens. So there's no telephoto lens here on the XR, which does mean although this phone does have the standard 12 megapixel sensor with an f1.8 aperture, it is slightly limited on what it can do, mainly with the portrait mode. So portrait mode has become this huge thing over the past couple of years, and Apple generally does a really good job with it on their devices. But because the XR does lack that additional sensor which is used for depth detail, that does mean that this phone processes the portrait mode directly through software instead of doing it through the hardware like the other models, which means it's only capable of working on human subjects and nothing else. But the portrait mode here still does a great job. I've really enjoyed using this mode, but it also has its faults. Sometimes it will blur out facial hair or pieces of clothing, which just stands out in the final product. As for regular photography, I really enjoyed the photos that this phone was capable of taking. You get really great amounts of detail here with the XR, and the color reproduction just makes the pictures pop out at you. This has easily become one of my favorite cameras that I've ever used on any smartphone, but the biggest downside is that it does lose quality with nighttime photography, so I wouldn't recommend it for that. But yeah, I was overall very satisfied with using this camera. It does an amazing job in outdoor settings and really brings the image to life. So if you're big on cameras, I'm sure you'll be satisfied with the photos that this phone produces, and same goes for the video recording. This phone does record in 4K at 24, 30, and 60 frames per second, and video quality on here is also great. And of course, that front-facing 7 megapixel camera does a pretty good job as well. Not the best selfie camera, but I'm pretty pleased with most of the images. The camera is easily one of my favorite features on this phone, aside from the battery life, which are two huge features that I look at when purchasing a device. That and the display, which again, this one I wasn't a fan of, but for most people this display should be fine. But overall, I really liked the XR. There's a reason why I stuck to using this phone for almost a year now, and that's because it's just that great. Now, with the newer iPhones being right around the corner, if you're thinking about getting the XR, I would highly recommend that you wait it out. I'm sure Apple is going to release another cost-efficient model this year with upgraded specs and design, so I would really wait it out and see what that looks like. And even then, once those are announced, the XR will most likely drop in price, which I would say makes it that much more worth it. Anyways guys, that's it. That's my 1-year review on the iPhone XR. Let me know what you guys think about it in the comments down below. If you have any questions, feel free to ask away. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video.